The Seattle Seahawks have the 16th pick in the NFL draft and could very well be in the market for an upgrade at quarterback, especially when you consider the fact that Drew Lock's contract is expiring and Geno Smith had a huge drop-off in production from 2022 to 2023. Compile that with the fact that there's going to be a brand new offensive coordinator, brand new coaches, brand new everything under new Seahawks head coach Mike Macdonald. Now, if the Seahawks do in fact want to move on from Geno Smith, they actually have a few viable options. What's going on, guys? It's your boy Mike Adams. I just want to say thank you to everyone who subscribed to the channel so far. We're coming closer and closer to 1,000 subscribers, and that is so awesome. Thank you. If you like the content in this video, please be sure to hit that like and subscribe button to help the channel grow. Now let's get to the video. Now, the first option, and one of the less likely options, if we're being honest, would be to cut Geno Smith and then to sign a quarterback in free agency. This free agency cycle, Kirk Cousins, Ryan Tannehill, Marcus Mariota, Sam Darnold, Drew Lock, Baker Mayfield, Gardner Minshew, Joe Flacco are all set to be available. Russell Wilson might also be available, as the Broncos might cut him, but I'm not sure that John Schneider has forgiven Russell Wilson for trying to get him fired a few years ago. So Russell's probably not an option. I do expect that Kirk Cousins is going to re-sign with the Vikings, and I expect that Baker Mayfield is probably going to re-sign with the Buccaneers. That's not a done deal yet. And if Seattle opens up their wallet, maybe you could get one of those guys to come to the PNW. Especially when you factor in what Seattle has to offer in terms of its offense. They've got a rejuvenated offensive line. They've got a two-headed backfield with Kenneth Walker III and Zach Charbonnet. They've got the league's deepest receiving core. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith and Jigba, D. Eskridge, and Jake Bobo. I don't know another receiving core that 1 through 5 is that solid. Now, the second option that the Seahawks have is they could trade to acquire a new quarterback. If the Bears want to draft Caleb Williams with the first pick overall, then Justin Fields is obviously going to be available via trade. Seahawks could trade for Fields. It probably wouldn't cost too much, I wouldn't think, especially if they throw in Geno Smith, which could be a smart move. You're asking, okay, if the Bears are going to draft the future in Caleb Williams, why would they want Geno Smith? Because maybe it's advantageous to have Caleb Williams sit behind a veteran for a year and then become the starter. Some of the best quarterbacks that have played in this league sat behind a veteran before becoming the starter. We're talking about Tom Brady, who sat behind Drew Bledsoe. We're talking about Patrick Mahomes, who sat behind Alex Smith. Even one of the new good quarterbacks, Brock Purdy, he was the third string behind Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo. So if the Bears really are all in on Caleb Williams, that means they definitely need to move on from Justin Fields, and maybe it's to their advantage to pair Geno Smith and Shane Waldron up again. They've been together the last bunch of years. Pair them up again in Chicago, let Caleb sit behind Geno for a year, or if it starts to go bad towards the middle of the season, all right, then maybe you pull Geno, put Caleb in finally. It could be the best long-term solution for them to get a veteran like Geno Smith. Now, if they don't want to do that, then Seattle could always just cut Geno. All that would mean is that it costs Seattle a little bit more in the trade, maybe a second-round pick or something. But Justin Fields is available via trade if the Bears are going to draft Caleb Williams. Now, the Raiders are probably fielding offers for Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't know if that's the best option. Now, Zach Wilson's one that I find kind of interesting because it probably doesn't cost that much to trade for him. We're talking middle-round pick probably. And I'm also not sold that Zach Wilson was the problem in New York. He had one receiver to throw to. He had a terrible offensive line. And every time the Jets tried to replace Zach Wilson with somebody else, they were terrible. They looked worse than Zach Wilson looked. So if we got Zach Wilson for cheap and we stuck him behind a Seahawks offensive line and gave him the Seahawks receiving core, I don't really see the downside because it didn't cost us that much. And he could turn out to be a tremendous quarterback. Now, believe me, I get it if you don't want Zach Wilson. Another option is Mason Rudolph. Also shouldn't cost too much to get him. He played well down the stretch of this season, so that's the only reason I kind of throw him in here as somebody who could be a fit, but I'm not sold on it. But let me throw two more at you that make a lot of sense to me. Dak Prescott and Jared Goff. I know, that sounds crazy. Hear me out. Both those quarterbacks are entering the last year of their contracts. So if the Cowboys don't want to keep Dak, if the Lions don't want to keep Jared, one of the two of those are a viable option for Seattle. Let's talk about the Cowboys first. They've made it clear already that they're looking to the future, because otherwise why trade for Trey Lance? It made no sense. Unless you're thinking Trey Lance is the future of the franchise. Dak Prescott is young enough that I wouldn't think you're looking ahead yet, but they are, which means that they're not sold that Dak is their guy, which means he might be available via trade for the Seahawks to take. Now, in the case of the Lions, okay, maybe this one's a little bit more of wishful thinking because it does make sense to me why they would want him to play out this contract. If they can't work out a deal at the end and they want to keep him, then they could still tag him. Really, they could tag him twice and it'd still make financial sense. Here's my pitch to Detroit. We can trade you Geno, who has 2 years left on his deal. We'll take Goff and we'll work out a deal with him. We'll figure it out, assuming that you guys aren't sold on Goff. Now, if you're not sold on Goff and you're not sold on Geno has a very team-friendly contract, and at least you've got a guy for the next 2 years. So that's why it's to your advantage. The reason that Goff could be to Seattle's advantage is because he's a good quarterback that I think we could work a deal out with. Like I said, I think that one's a bit of a stretch. If I was the Lions, I'm probably sticking with Jared Goff, but they haven't re-signed him yet, so that's what gives me thoughts that, hey, maybe he is available for trade. Now, the third and probably best option for the Seahawks to upgrade quarterback is to get a quarterback in this draft. This is a deep quarterback draft year. And the reason this makes particular sense is because of Geno Smith's contract. The Seahawks could do exactly what I just suggested for the Bears, which is that you keep Geno, you draft a quarterback, stick that quarterback behind Geno for a year or maybe 2 years. There's 2 years left on Geno's deal. It'd be too easy to stick a guy behind Geno for a year, 2 max, and let him learn and develop before throwing him out there. With the 16th overall pick, a lot of draft boards have the Seahawks landing either J.J. McCarthy or they could get Michael Penix Jr. if they are in fact looking for quarterback. But maybe they could even slide up a little bit to go get Bo Nix. This draft board has Bo Nix going at number 11 to the Minnesota Vikings. Now, if the Vikings were to re-sign Kirk Cousins, maybe they don't need Bo Nix, and they'd be open to trading out of that pick. So maybe you swap first-round picks and Seattle throws in a second-rounder. Maybe that's enough for Minnesota to go, yeah, we'll trade back for an additional second-rounder. We got a quarterback. We're good. And then the flip side of that is if the Vikings don't re-sign Kirk Cousins, then I guess this whole conversation is moot because I think the Seahawks should swoop in and sign Kirk Cousins. If he's available, I really do think that Kirk Cousins could work wonders in Seattle with that offensive line and that receiving core. Now, going back, let's assume the Seahawks don't have Kirk Cousins. Let's assume the Vikings aren't willing to trade with Seattle. That's fine because maybe Seattle wants to slide even higher in the draft. Maybe all the way up to number 3 with the New England Patriots. In that case, I would say it probably takes us swapping first rounds. Seahawks probably have to throw in a first rounder next year and Geno Smith to serve as a bridge quarterback for New England until they can get their guy next year. The only way I see that playing out is if New England's not sold on whoever the third prospect is. It's unclear if that's going to be Drake May or Jaden Daniels. It'll be one of the two, and if New England doesn't like whoever they wind up with, maybe they are willing to trade out of it. Now, if that's the case, should Seattle really trade up to get a guy that New England's valuing as it's probably not that good? Well, I don't know. New England's done a pretty crappy job of drafting in the last 10 years, so if they say a guy's not good, maybe that makes me go, yeah, he's probably pretty good. Okay, so that's what it would take to slide up to number 3, I think. What about sliding up to number 2 with the Commanders? Commanders probably don't care about Geno Smith. Probably not interested because they have Sam Howell who can serve as their bridge quarterback if they need it. So if the Seahawks are interested in either Drake May or Jaden Daniels, maybe they want to trade all the way up to number 2. In that case, I think it costs them a first rounder this year, first rounder next year, a second rounder this year, and a third next year. That probably gets it done for the number 2 overall. If not, you might need to throw a sweetener in there. I don't know if that means Zach Charbonnet. I don't know if that means Jackson Smith and Jigba or Tyler Lockett. And by the way, I don't love moving on from those guys, but that's probably what it costs to get it done. Okay, now what if the Seahawks want to go number 1? Now let's bear in mind that Chicago does have Justin Fields. And Justin Fields did play well down the stretch this season. So there is reason to believe that Chicago could be plenty comfortable going, no, we actually want to trade out of here. What would it cost Seattle to get the number 1 pick overall in the 2024 NFL draft? Because Seattle is convinced that Caleb Williams is the guy and they need him. It definitely costs your first rounder this year. It'll cost Seattle's first rounder next year, a second this year, a second next year, and DK Metcalf. I think that's what it would take to get it done. Because then if you're Chicago, you look at it like, okay, I just got a boatload of picks from Seattle, and I got DK Metcalf. So now my receiving core includes DK Metcalf, it includes DJ Moore, and I've got Justin Fields to throw to these guys. If you're Chicago, you start feeling really good about what your offense looks like. So maybe that's the way to get it done if you're Seattle and you want Caleb Williams. And if you're Chicago and you like Justin Fields and you feel like you just need another weapon for him to throw to, not to mention what else you can do with the picks that Seattle gives you, that could be the way that this goes. Now, I just want to be clear. I'm not saying that I like that option. So far, it hasn't worked out for teams trading all the way up to the number one to get a player, number 1, 2, or 3. It just doesn't generally work out when you trade up that high to get a quarterback, because there is so much unknown about how a college player is going to transition to the NFL. And it feels like quarterback is the most unpredictable position at who's going to transition and who's not. So if I was the GM of the Seahawks, I would not be trading all the way up to number 1, 2, or 3. Would I be willing to trade up to number 11? Yeah, I'd be willing to do that. I'd be willing to trade up with the Vikings to get Bo Nix. That's a little bit of an easier pill to swallow. It doesn't cost you nearly as much as trading up to those top 3 picks. But if you're Mike McDonald and you're John Schneider and you are convinced we're really a quarterback away, and with our deep receiving core, we can afford to give up one of our weapons. If that's the difference between getting another Super Bowl win and not, you better damn well do it. Please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button for more content surrounding happenings of the NFL, the MLB, the NHL, the NBA, the NCAA, the ABCD, the NWA, sports world. Please subscribe.